Hello. My dress has pockets. Ooh. It's so good. I always think, like, when I go to preach, what am I wearing? Because if I'm going to wear a headset, you got to plan your outfits. So I was very excited when I found out this had pockets. Now, good morning. I don't usually do PowerPoint, so let's see if this is working. Yes, sweet. All right, good, excellent. So I'm going to tell a little story just to kick us off. Oh, not that. But let me tell you a story. All right, a family from a remote area was making their first visit to a big city. They checked into the Grand Hotel and stood in amazement at the impressive sight. Leaving the reception desk, they came to the elevator entrance. They'd never seen an elevator before and just stared at it, unable to figure out what it was for. An old lady hobbled towards the elevator and went inside. The doors closed. And about a minute later, the doors opened and out came a stunningly good-looking lady. The dad couldn't stop staring. Without turning his head, he patted his son's arm and said, "Go get your mother, son." Now, it is an honor to be back preaching here. I haven't spoken up here for a little while now. It's nice to be being able to do it with my home church. And the title of my sermon is Conformed or Transformed. And I'm not talking about the type of transformation that happens in a magical elevator, but we are talking about the transformation that happens when you come into contact with Christ. And I think most of you know now where we're heading. We've had a beautiful prelim section which has fitted perfectly into this sermon today. So before we journey together, I'd love you to talk with your friends around you, and if you don't know them, please introduce yourself as well. 2 questions for you. When you hear the phrase unlikely hero, what fictional character or characters come to mind, and what historical people do you think of? Have a little discussion around with your friends there. Unlikely heroes. Hopefully you can think of 1 or 2 or a few. All right, so hopefully you thought of maybe a couple, I don't know about you, but I'm going to share one that we're going to be looking at today, an unlikely hero from the Bible, and his name is Paul. And in particular, we're going to be studying his letter of Romans. So I consider Romans to be like the Costco version of Paul's letters because it's huge, and it's the first of his letters in the Bible. So I want to begin today with a little bit of a background, especially if you're not quite familiar with Romans, or maybe it's just a refresher for those who do know it well. Paul was a Roman citizen from Tarsus. He was a Pharisee, a strict Jewish leader, and originally known as, some people know his name was Saul. Now, he was extremely passionate about following God. In fact, he was so passionate about it that he was killing Christians. He was arresting them, beating them, killing them, because he thought that they were going against God. So then we come to Acts 9, and Paul has this amazing encounter with Jesus, and he actually himself goes through a transformation, right? So he not only believes that Jesus was the Messiah, but he followed him and he helped other people who did not know Jesus become followers too. He became known as the apostle to the Gentiles and greatly increased the spread of Christianity outside its Jewish roots throughout the world. So it's pretty crazy. Like, this guy was killing Christians and now he is known as the apostle to the Gentiles, which is pretty cool. So he didn't actually start the church in Rome, but he cared about the people there because he saw all Christians as family, and logistically, Rome would have been a good base of operations as he planned to head further west to keep spreading the good news about Jesus. So here is this guy, radical transformation, and now he writes this letter to the Romans, and I think there's a couple of reasons why he's written it. 1, to provide his fullest explanation of the good news about Jesus. 2, to help the Christians in Rome with instructions on how to live as a unified family of believers, and 3, to guide them in their interactions with or around those who are not believers, even those who persecute them. So let us turn there. We're going to go to Romans chapter 12. Romans is in the New Testament. And we're going to pretty much stick here for today. And I have slides of other verses that we'll be reading, but so you can just stay here if you like. So Romans chapter 12, and we're going to be looking at verse 1 and 2. Now, I'm reading from the New Living Translation, so if you are able to flick over to a different translation, you can. The convenience of having technology these days. So Romans chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is the true way to worship him. Don't copy the behaviors and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. Now I'm going to read it again in the ESV version. I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God and what is good and acceptable and perfect. And when I study the Bible, I really like reading lots of different translations of a verse that I can pull apart so I can see different angles and stuff. So I'm going to read one more, so bear with me. This is the J.B. Phillips translation, and I really like how he says it. So, with eyes wide open to the mercies of God, I beg you, my brothers, as an act of intelligent worship, to give him your bodies as a living sacrifice, consecrated to him and acceptable by him. Don't let the world around you squeeze you into its own mold, but let God remold your minds from within, so that you may prove in practice that the plan of God for you is good, meets all his demands, and moves towards the goal of true maturity. Now, I'm going to give you 30 seconds, not very long. This is called the elevator story. So you get in the elevator, you see a neighbor, you've got 30 seconds pretty much to exchange niceties. So I want you to turn to your friends this time, and what we have just read, I want you to put it in your own words with your friend. You got 30 seconds. Go. Okay, so the elevator's stopped. Sorry, you're out the lift now. Hopefully we've got this concept now. We know what this verse is kind of saying. We're going to dive in deeply now. So whichever version you've read, the first word, and I'm sorry for those who are more mathematically inclined, I'm more English inclined, so I am going English today. But if you're an English teacher or you love English or you know what grammar is, we're going to kind of pull apart a little bit. So the first word that really sticks out to me is therefore, or in some versions it says and so, right? So this is known as a transition word, and this is telling us that something significant is coming. Not simply a transition word from sentence to sentence or paragraph to paragraph, but Paul here is signaling a shift from all 11 chapters preceding what he's about to say. So basically, Paul is about to explain this. In light of the first 11 chapters, where he talks about the good news of Jesus and all that he has done and all that he wants us to be, here's how we should live. So because of all that is explained in the first 11 chapters, therefore, we should offer ourselves, not as an afterthought, but as a response to God's mercies. And then Paul goes to say a little bit of an oxymoron. What's an oxymoron? Another English thing. Here we go. And it's a figure of speech where one or two words seem to contradict each other, such as deafening silence, negative income, working holiday. So what's Paul's oxymoron here? He says we should offer our bodies as a living sacrifice. When I think of the word sacrifice, I automatically think about the Old Testament laws, right? According to the laws, Jews were required to observe a complex system of animal sacrifice to atone for sin and to remind people of the significance of their sin. So what Paul describes here in Romans is strange. How can something that is sacrificed be described as living? I mean, we all know what living is, right? And we all know that sacrifice means to kill, to make something dead, to give up something for someone else. So a living sacrifice describes, in a sense, a deliberate living killing, which kind of reminds me a little bit of the passage in Luke. And you don't have to turn there because I'm going to put it on the screen if you trust me that I did. So Luke 9, 23 to 24 says this. If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way. Take up your cross daily and follow me. If you try to hang on to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for my sake, you will save it. So there you go. Living killing, a living sacrifice. And I found this passage in N.T. Wright's, one of his things that he says. He says this, and I really like the way he's written this. One's whole self must be laid on the altar like a sacrifice in the temple. The big difference is that whereas the sacrifice is there to be killed, the Christian's self-offering is actually all about coming alive with new life and bursts out in unexpected ways once the evil deeds of the self are put to death. To offer our bodies as a living sacrifice is to make the daily decision that my desires must die so that I can be free and willing to listen to God's will and desires for me. Now, Paul also uses two adjectives in here, another English thing. Adjectives are describing the nouns in the sentence. They make the sentences sound good. So the first one that he uses is holy. To be holy means to be completely set apart. And in this context, I think it is centering our lives around our relationship with Jesus and following his example of holiness as best we can, because we can never measure up, right? The second adjective is the phrase acceptable to God. Now, in 1 Peter 2, verse 4 to 5, it says this. You are coming to Christ, who is the living cornerstone of God's temple. He was rejected by people, but he was chosen by God for great honor. And you are the living stones that is building into his spiritual temple. What's more, you are his holy priests. Through the mediation of Jesus Christ, you offer spiritual sacrifices that please God. So it's not that we are acceptable to God on our own, nor can we make ourselves acceptable to him. Instead, we are acceptable to God only through Jesus Christ. And what we offer to God is made acceptable only through him. So think about this. Your body is the vehicle by which you sin. We read back in chapter 3 of Romans, and you can keep your fingers there because we're going to come back there. But if you want to flick over to Romans 3, I want to read this because the words in here are just, whoa, yeah, bit crazy. So, Romans chapter 3 and verse 13, it says this. Their talk is foul, like the stench from an open grave. Their tongues are filled with lies. Snake venom drips from their lips. Their mouths are full of cursing and bitterness. They rush to commit murder. This is the language that he's using for us, right? So our bodies are the vehicle with which we sin. In fact, I think it sounds really terrible, right? No? I think it does. Sounds terrible. But that description is dead on as to what we are compared to God. So Paul is saying back here in chapter 12, now in light of God's mercies towards you, use the totality of your physical, your everything body to serve God. Now, as I was preparing this sermon, and I'm really sorry, Lorraine, I only thought about this yesterday. And I was like, I won't do that to you. And I'm going to be one of those random preachers that sings in the middle of their sermon. But there was a hymn that came to mind when I was putting this together. And I don't know if you want to indulge me just a little bit. We're going to sing the first verse. Take my life and let it be. So I don't know what a good key is, but that's fine. Take my life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to thee. Take my hands and let them move at the impulse of thy love, at the impulse of thy love. Oh, you sound so beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for joining in. We're not going to sing the whole thing because obviously there's a whole thing there. But let me read these to you because this is exactly what Paul is talking about. Take my feet and let them be swift and beautiful for thee. Take my voice and let me sing, always only for my King. Take my lips and let them be filled with messages from thee. Take my silver and my gold, not a mite would I withhold. Take my will and make it thine, it shall be no longer mine. Take my heart, it is thine own, it shall be thy royal throne. Take my love, my Lord, I pour, at thy feet its treasure store. Take myself and I will be ever, only, all for thee. This is what he is talking about, right? Paul is calling us to. This is our logical, true way to worship him with everything. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. Give him your bodies as a living sacrifice, consecrated to him and acceptable by him. Now, we're going to go into verse 2, and we're going to reread it so that we can remember what we were talking about. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. I'm going to play a little video, I think, to set us up for this scene. It's all right, I don't need sound effects.
Wow.
So this movie is called Wally. It came out a little while ago. And basically the story is like these humans have totally trashed the world and they're living now on a space station. And this little creature, the little robot, Wally, is the only one on Earth who's cleaning it up. And he has been made to do one job, except he develops a personality and he's pretty cute. He has one job, to make conformity out of the chaos. So what's the difference between being transformed and conformed? I've put it up on the screen. Both of them require change. Both of them require submission. And both of them require someone or something else as a standard of measure. When we are conforming to the world, we are allowing the world to change us, to be the standard against which we measure our life and are submitting to its values, as it molds us into something usually the same thing as everyone else around us. How many of you have social media? Of course, we have to bring technology into this, right? How many of you have smartphones? My question is this: how many of us are actually being formed by our technology, even without us knowing it happens? So there's this lady called Jen Wilkin who wrote an article called How Social Media Use Can Rival God. And in there she says this: we are open to influence, able to be swayed. Think about your daily life for a minute. How has social media affected it? What did you see there that shaped what's in your pantry, in your medicine cabinet, your workout routine, your wardrobe, or your home decor? Now think about your thought life. Social media forms malleable humans into an image. How Christians use it determines whether it yields us well-formed or malformed. Where we cast our gaze and for how long influences not just how we live, but who we are. Interesting, right? I'm pretty sure all of us can think of at least one thing we've changed because we saw it on a reel or some influencer was promoting it. If I'm the only one, then that's okay. I confess that I have done this many times. How many times have I spent lots of money on weight loss things? Yeah, Josh could tell you. Okay, so conform means to press in, to squeeze in from the outside. Now, I got a little bit of a demonstration here. Maybe I just need to keep talking to you about this. Just like Wally takes whatever is around him and squeezes it into these little boxes that all look the same. So this tube of toothpaste, what happens when I squeeze it? What happens? I can't hear you. It comes out. Thank you, kids. I knew I could rely on you. It does. It comes out. So what happens is if we keep being conformed to the world actually is squeezing us in. And this is what happens. If we continue to squeeze, here's a question for you. Are you a squeezer or a roller? I don't know what I am. No judgment either. Which way? But if I continue to keep squeezing, what's going to happen? It's going to become empty. Is there going to be much inside? No, right? Now, this is the world. The world continually squeezes us. It doesn't add any value to you, and it will leave you completely empty, completely drained. Sometimes you just can't, you won't be able to function properly, right? So, Jesus, on the other hand, he wants to transform us. Now, transformation means to change from the inside out, like a butterfly. I don't know if you've ever watched like a proper documentary on it, but the fact, like when they go in their little chrysalis, they become like mush, and then they become a whole new creature. I think it's fantastic. It's just amazing. But this is what happens. Change from the inside. So take this balloon, for example. It is empty. And that's how we kind of start. When we start to learn to love God, when we start to follow Jesus, we can be transformed by the power of the Holy Spirit. And I'm really hoping that this balloon's going to blow up. Good, it didn't pop. I bought cheap balloons, so that would ruin the analogy. But once we learn to start following Jesus, the Holy Spirit fills us up and changes us and transforms us. I mean, how many of you would like to carry around an empty tube of toothpaste all day? Like, people will look at you like you're weird. Like, they will cross the other side of the road because you're just carrying this around. But if you're carrying this around, look, I can already see you smiling. It brings joy. And little kids at the end, I'm sure, will come up to me and say, "Can I have the balloon?" Because it happens all the time. They want it. They want to be part of your journey if you are being filled or being transformed by Christ. Is this hitting you a little bit? I hope it is. It's okay if it's not. Notice how Paul also doesn't say, "You transform yourselves, you do the change." No, he says, "Be transformed." Or, I like the way J.B. Phillips says it, "Let God remold your minds from within." God wants to change us, and he wants to change us from the inside out. He is not seeking external conformity, but inward transformation. Now, good old Auntie Ellen says this. In the Councils on Health, it says this: "Men have polluted the soul temple, and God calls upon them to awake and strive with all their might to win back their God-given manhood. Nothing but the grace of God can convict and convert the heart. From him alone can the slaves of custom obtain power to break the shackles that bind them." Our transformation cannot be achieved by us. Nothing but the grace of God can convict and convert the heart. So, why do we need to be transformed by the renewing of our minds? Well, I think it's because that is where our separation from God began. We chose to turn from God. Our minds are powerful control centers that can be easily swayed. And there's a book I highly recommend called Switch on Your Brain by a doctor called Dr. Caroline Leaf. And in there she says this really cool thing, and I love this. As we think, we change the physical nature of our brain. As we consciously direct our thinking, we can wire out toxic patterns of thinking and replace them with healthy thoughts. Our brains are incredible, right? That's pretty cool. Changing the way we think changes our perspective, which changes how you act in the world. And if we don't change the way we think, regardless of how many times we read the Bible, if our minds don't change, we will simply impose our own biases and labels on the words that we read. So our minds need to be turned around. Our imaginations need to be captured by Christ. Our operating systems that control our fundamental thought processes need to be replaced as a new one, and a new one needs to be downloaded. Colossians 3:16 says this, "Let the message about Christ in all its richness fill your lives. Teach and counsel each other with all the wisdom he gives. Sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs to God with thankful hearts." Now the last part of Romans 12 verse 2 says this. Finishes by saying, "Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is pleasing and perfect." And other versions say that by your testing, you may discern what the will of God is and what is good and acceptable and perfect. When God renews our minds, we are enabled to discern and appreciate his will and determined to obey it. You will know that God is doing his work in you as God's word begins to make sense to you. And truths begin to leap off the page. His word will comfort you, challenge you, confront you, encourage you. God, by his Spirit, will use it to change you from the inside out, making you the person he wants you to be and enabling you to do what he designed you to do, not what the world says. And so, or therefore, in light of all we have discussed today, in response to God's lavish grace, we need to surrender everything. From now on, it's all his. He burns with passion for us. He wants all of us. And C.S. Lewis is a great author. And I said I had lots of quotes today, but he says this, and I really like the way he says this. He cannot bless us unless he has us. When we try to keep within us an area that is our own, we try to keep an area of death. Therefore, in love, he claims all. There's no bargaining with him. Really cool, hey? So I'm going to just finish here by reading the J.B. Phillips version of Romans 12, verse 1 to 2 again, because I really like it. So here it is. "With eyes wide open to the mercies of God, I beg you, my brothers, as an act of intelligent worship, to give him your bodies as a living sacrifice, consecrated to him and acceptable by him. Don't let the world around you squeeze you into its own mold, but let God remold your minds from within, so that you may prove in practice that the plan of God for you is good, meets all his demands, and moves towards the goal of true maturity." Thank you.
The Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward